Would you like to introduce yourself? Who are you and where can people find you?
My name's Lorna Fyffe and I can be found on Instagram at Lorna_Fyffe. And Fyffe is Fyffe.
Thank you very much. That's the best introduction so far, with a spelling included. So, I guess we are an unlikely friendship. So would you like to tell people how we found each other? How we know each other?
Yeah. So in March 2020, I instinctively knew that something was very, very wrong. And in fact, a feeling of terror actually gripped me when I thought of the extenuating circumstances of what I actually realised was happening. I then spent from March 2020 until I think it was December 2020, speaking to people, trying to communicate with people in any way I could. I didn't know what WhatsApp was. I'd heard of it. I heard of Instagram, but I didn't know how to access it. And I was told I was crazy when I was saying pubs were closed down to stop us communicating. I was called a conspiracy theorist, and I was really desperate one day.
And now I just call you a ranty bitch.
I was definitely a ranty bitch. And this sounds crazy. I was in tears one day and something told me to go to Instagram, and I looked at the circles along the top and I saw that nurse who asked questions. And I called one of my daughters and I said, am I allowed to speak to people on Instagram? And they said, do what you like, Mum, which I usually do. And I sent Jenna a direct message, and Jenna sent me a tutorial telling me how to make my Instagram page. And I'm twice her age. And
how old are you?
I'm 70.
70, yeah.
So you're
35 and a half.
35, so I'm twice her age, but age is just a number. And we become friends, and wow, she's, opened up a whole different world. I felt like I'd kind of come home a bit.
Sent you little tutorials of how to use little videos with the microphone on, how to
loads
use.
of tutorials. In fact, you need to send me more tutorials because I'm so shadow banned.
Oh no.
I need to make a new Instagram page.
Do you know what, you bloody pensioners, there was a woman in, correct me, I'm going to get this wrong, I can't remember if it was Portsmouth or Plymouth, and she was so unsuspecting. She was in a little hat and this big coat. There was nothing kind of detail. It was quite if you were going to point her out, it'd just be like a blue coat. She was quite plainly dressed, and she had this long skirt down to her ankles and this perm, like a typical stereotype old person, if you will. And I think she was in her 80s, and she came up to me, and I think she was on like a 10th Facebook ban or something.
Wow.
And it was all you, while I was walking, all these pensioners like rebelling against the system.
Yeah, we've been in it a long time.
Well, yeah, that's a good point actually. Maybe that's why you've got the foresight and the wisdom and experience.
Last 40 years especially.
So 40 years. So what? When's that? Oh gosh,
1980.
Yeah, 80. Yeah.
Particularly started to really notice changes where the family was being attacked, and you're having to both work. We used to talk about latchkey kids years ago because nobody was at home when children came home from school, and it's all culminated in now.
And like modern day life where people are so busy, and there seems to be a thing about $500,000 house. Gotta have a $500,000 house, $500,000. Like, are you serious? Do you know how much you're gonna have to be working for that? And then if you have a look at your mortgage repayments and see how much you might be able to afford the monthly payments, but do you have any idea of how much you're actually paying back?
Yeah.
The pressure that people put on themselves.
We lost our house in one of the crashes. We lost our house. I can't even remember the year. I've kind of blocked it out. We lost our house. We were homeless. We were in a homeless families unit, and we were given a housing association property. So, had a huge impact. I think it was in the 80s at some point, but I've definitely it's not a memory I like to revisit. actually.
So we won't revisit that one. But one of the reasons why I've invited you onto the podcast to have a talk is because you're a drug addict.
Well, I'm still in treatment for heroin addiction, and I've been in treatment for over 30 years. And
I wonder how many people watching that would have thought, I don't know how many seconds we're in, 5 minutes. I wonder how many people would have thought that's why you're here.
Well, probably not. I've actually spoken at two conferences, medical conferences. I've actually spoken about discrimination within the NHS when you do present as an addict or an alcoholic. I've had some awful experiences in A&E departments because I was also a teacher for my whole career. And it's...
so there's a contradiction in identities there.
Completely.
They don't match. They don't marry up at all.
No, they don't. And I was a primary school teacher. I was a very good teacher. You know when you're a good teacher. And I'm still in touch with kids who are now 40 and fond memories.
Could you teach now?
Oh, I taught all through lockdown.
Would you want to?
Well, that's a whole different subject now, because I remember arguing about political correctness many years ago, and obviously we're not here today to get into what is actually going on now. I think if I was teaching now,
that's the second podcast you booked into after
this.
Yeah,
okay.
You committed.
Yeah, but so it's quite incongruous to think that a heroin addict would be a good teacher. And I wasn't using for my whole career, but there were times when I was, and I was on methadone. But there are people in all sorts of professions who use
nurses,
as a coping mechanism. And I'm only on I'm on a drug called Subutex, which is they reckon it's better than methadone. Just 2 milligrams a day, which isn't much, but I'm not prepared to give it up at the moment. I have certain things going on in my life, and one of the main reasons I'm not prepared to give it up is a bit of a kind of a sciencey thing. It's attached to receptors in your brain. Methadone being a full agonist, which is fully on the receptors, this is a partial agonist. So I'm the type of person that does a lot of reading and research, and I don't want it to throw me into any kind of level of depression.
Mm-hmm. Especially coming up with the winter, and you said before.
And I suffer with the winter depression. So I'm quite happy to be living my life on 2 milligrams of Subutex, but then that takes you into a whole other ball game, because you are connected to a service. And you are a service user, and you have to play by their rules.
It's interesting you just said then service user, and obviously the association with drugs and being a user.
I find that pretty abhorrent. I actually did a peer mentoring course, and I'm with an organisation called Change, Grow, Live, and they are countrywide, I believe. And having been in treatment for 30 years, it's changed dramatically over the years. I wouldn't call it a service now at all. And when I did that peer mentoring course, and I actually got my hands on the handbook and read it, and got a sense of the box ticking exercise that addiction service really truly is. And you know, I'm a peer mentor, and interestingly I've been given nobody to mentor. I only did the course just over a year ago, January 2021. I would like to think I would have been given somebody, because I really do think I could potentially help somebody. Also, 30 odd years ago when I went into treatment, we had weekly meetings. We would go to the local hospital where they've got the unit where you visit. You would see your key worker regularly. You would talk about all aspects of your life. Over the years, that's gradually diminished. In fact, COVID, because you have to, there's another element to this. If you don't attend, you don't get your script. And for me personally, in health in medicine, call it what you like. If you are diabetic, if you have obesity problems, if you have any other type of healthcare, this isn't, I'm not putting this over really well, you're kind of punished if you're an addict. So if you miss your appointment, or if you, for example, if when you go to your weekly meetings, they have to test your urine, and if there is heroin in your urine and you're on a script, you can be sort of reprimanded. In the past, we were warned that if we used, they might reduce our methadone. I was on methadone then. My whole journey, I would say, in treatment has been a journey of shame, if you like. And I don't ever sit like I'm sitting now with Jenna and go over this. It's just something you go with.
I wonder if it's, so I've spoke a lot about people placing their values onto other people. And I almost wonder if, because they can control or can limit the amount of drug or alcohol intake, there's not that level of empathy or compassion with somebody who can't. So it's almost like, well, I don't do that. I don't act in that way. I don't need that to fill a void or to numb or whatever it is. So just snap out of it.
I found the best key workers are ex-addicts, actually. I've had a couple, one in particular. Yeah, they've been ex-addicts and they've had much more insight. But over the last 5 years, probably, the service, I wouldn't call it a service. There's a lack of funding, has just become much more impersonal.
So when we talk about person-centred care, we talk about what milestones what achievements that individual can do. So, for example, mobility. So let's say you've twisted your ankle and you're in a wheelchair temporarily, you've got a cast on, whatever. So is it realistic to say that you'll walk again? Yes. Is it realistic to say that you'll do a marathon? No, probably not, especially if you've never done one before. So although if I'm a nurse and I'm a marathon runner, it seems like some nurses put that in the care plan. So I think that it has to be, with person-centred care, it has to be looking at you, where are you now, where have you come from, and where do you want to be?
Yeah.
Rather than, like you say, just, it's not person-centred care. Because, and this is, I get a lot of criticism because I'm not an NHS nurse, and this is one of the reasons why I really, really struggled after I qualified, because words and actions weren't matching. We were saying that we wanted to treat patients as individuals, yet then it was all tick box exercises. And I really, really struggled with that. Like, you're telling me, and the information I'm receiving is we must treat as individuals, but what I'm seeing and my experience is that's not what's happening.
Yeah, totally. And
when you say about tick box exercise, if you think about CQC, so the Care Quality Commission, all people talk about is compliance. Compliance. We need to be compliant. Are we compliant?
Yeah.
Is your training up to date? And we're not going to be compliant. Nobody says, are we caring?
Yeah. Yeah, I've had quite a lot of dealings with CQC over the last 4 years with a situation with my husband, and I've had to speak to them even recently to encourage them to go into a facility which I don't consider is giving that care, facility that's been open 23 years, and they are investigating, but it took a lot of emailing, a lot of
you've got to be a dog with a bone.
Yeah, which is not really my forte. But in defence of Kimberly, my key worker, she does try. You get a sense she would like to do so much more than she is able to do, and she had been trying to encourage me into therapy, which is something I've never ever done. And I did seek therapy recently. It wasn't anything to do with addiction. It was to do with a situation with my husband, and I was feeling very, very sad. And I approached through just the online, I can't even remember what it was called now, where you just go online and do it. And they came back to me and said, oh, you're in treatment with CGL. You have to seek therapy through them. So it just relegates me, age 70, with a teaching career behind me, to that addict again, even in something as straightforward as that. And actually I have got a therapist and had her for 5 weeks, and she's actually very good. And we're not really talking, we are talking about a sadness that I've got deep within me. We are, and obviously addiction comes into it. But I felt it was a shame that I was relegated back to that service, just dismissed, if you like, kind of. That's what you feel like.
Yeah, and I want to talk to you in a second about identity, because I know that's something that when I was coming up to finish my walking with a sandwich board, well, not even just when I was finishing it, but I was more aware when I was finishing it, but throughout I was aware that I did not want this to become my identity. Yeah. She says, with that nurse who has questions
on the van.
On the mug. No, but like this is like a different direction, different conversations, and I'm not kind of like plodding around with. You're
much more with still. That. Anyone who knows you knows that. Yeah. And
I was very, very aware of all the nice things people were saying to me, and how that is very easy to hold on to, and. I almost thought about it. I might have said this when I was talking with Rob. Almost compared it. Not that I'm comparing myself to a Premier League footballer, but when they stop playing, and there's that down. So I was very, very aware that I'm Jenna Platt. I'm not this sandwich board nurse. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk with you about that. But just quickly, just out of curiosity, did any parents ever find out that you were an addict while you?
Yeah, they did.
And how did that come about, and what was their reaction?
I lost my job. I was asked to resign.
How did they find out?
I was actually unwell, and I actually went to A&E, and it was before GDPR, which I have issues with anyway. GDPR, don't get me started. And the receptionist at A&E was the sister of a mother in my class, and in my history had addiction, and she told her sister, who told the head teacher. And I was called to the head teacher's office, and I was asked to resign after about 28 years, I think it was, which was really sad. Very sad. But you talking about being defined as like that nurse. I liked being a teacher. I liked the. And
were you a competent teacher at that time?
I was always a competent teacher.
So that I can understand why she did that. She ultimately wants to protect her children.
Obviously, it's a horrible thought to think that you have a heroin addict teaching young children.
Because all the stereotypes, kind of. But what her lived experience of you was.
Yeah.
Versus that overriding stereotype, it was a stereotype that got you sacked.
Yeah, and there wasn't any room for me to stay. Not when you have a parent knowing that. And I loved my children. I taught up to year 6. It is now in juniors. I taught in a referral centre, excluded children. What can I say? It was a fabulous job. It was different every day, and we had a lot. Actually, before the national curriculum came in, we had so much scope because we just did our own thing. We just did lesson plans with the head, and of course they copied the national curriculum from Australia. I think it was about 1981. I'm not sure. I can't really remember, and it became much more regimented. But you still, I don't think teaching's like that now. It is another whole ball game, really. Very different now. So much stuff being brought into school now, into the curriculum, that I would seriously take issues with. Having a 13-year-old granddaughter, I get
It's like they can't focus on what they're supposed to be there for.
Yeah.
There's so much fluff, and I'm a huge fan of like streamlining. So streamlining processes, streamlining your decision making, and I just think that there's just so much extra. It's almost like Buckaroo. Like there's only so many like hats and saddles and what are those rope lassos or whatever they're called. Like there's only so many of them that you can add on before there's just burnout.
It just falls apart. It's too much.
Or the children start to behave differently.
I have to often speak to my granddaughter. When she tells me certain things that are going on, I feel like I've got to pull her around and say, hold on a minute. But she's a bit like her grandmother. She's questions. I'm sitting in a van which says that nurse who asks questions. And
when did you tell me? When did, because we were talking on Instagram for quite a while and messaging.
I always feel like I have to let people know. I don't know why I do that. You've really made me think about that, Jenna. You've really made me think about that.
Because I wouldn't have known. We've known each other, gosh, I'm getting mixed up in my years now. Is it 2 years?
2000, it was Christmas 2020.
Yes.
Or New Year, you just got married. You sent me the photo of you in Las Vegas.
So I never would have known.
No, I know. Nobody needs to know. I just, I started using when I was 14. There is some background, which I'm not going to go into. I was sent to a government institution at 4 years old with TB, where some pretty bad stuff happened. And I actually did a project with the government called the Truth Project about 5 years ago. I was contacted and asked to tell my story. I could do it in any format. I could be interviewed. I could do an email. I could write an essay. I could go somewhere. And I just wrote a story. Well, a truthful story. And they actually, the premise was that we don't want this to happen anymore in these institutions. It was actually a home in Broadstairs, and it was still carrying on into the 70s. And I found heroin at 14 years old and dipped in and out of it, trained as a teacher, various times in my life for various reasons. So I suppose maybe because I was so young, it was in my formative years that I identify as an addict. I just identify as that person. It's I'm only really thinking about it now since you've spoken to me about it, kind of exploring.
Do you think it was I'm just going to move your mic just a little nudge. Do you think it was almost, because you speak about shame, and it's almost like a nervous dog that barks, like I'll bark first. I'll warn you off first.
Yeah, it is.
Like, you're going to find out on my terms.
Yeah.
Maybe with that experience you had in A&E.
Oh, that's happened every time.
That wasn't on your terms.
Every time I've been in A&E. I won't be that patient in bed 11 who was a teacher. I'll be that patient in bed 11 who's an addict. And always, and my husband.
Dodgy leg.
Yeah, always. It's always been that. And I've spoken at, as I say, to, they're actually tissue viability conferences, actually. And when I've spoken, I've worked with a doctor from the Royal Free, and we sit in nice armchairs, and they've got pictures of my family on the wall at the back. And I say, look, my name's Lorna, and I'm a heroin addict, or, still in treatment. And have a discussion, and I'm asked lots of questions, and it's a really good exchange. In the audience there are doctors, physios, OTs, tissue viability nurses, all sorts of people, and it's really interesting to take that discussion and just with the pictures on the wall. And it wasn't always perfect at home by any means, I have to say. Absolutely.
Coming back to identity and the impact that it's had. So we were saying that you would tell people that you're an addict
almost.
I wonder if that's like a form of protection, control.
Yeah, it probably is. I live in an area where people kind of found out, but I was still that teacher. I don't know, it's complicated, but it is. I think it's all involved with the treatment as well, over the, like you're a lesser person. You feel like you're not good enough. Even looking at the social credit system, if they get their way, which they won't, I would be way down the list on Subutex. Blimey, I probably wouldn't be able to leave the house. It's, it makes you devalue yourself.
Do you think that was because of a stereotype that you started to devalue yourself?
Yeah, definitely.
Messages that you got from the outside?
Definitely. But especially in hospital.
Yeah, I know.
Especially in hospital.
People, I don't know, with the, I'm not bitching about the NHS, but this is an observation through my experience. Like, there are many, many very good nurses and doctors and dietitians and dentists and all those ones. However, I think the general public kind of assumes that because you're a nurse or a doctor that you are this nice, caring, helpful, friendly person that hasn't got any bias within yourself or any frustration that you just want to take out on someone. And I've seen some people that should not be working in care.
Yeah.
They should not be working as a nurse. And, when you said before about, the addict in ward 19, room 19 or whatever, my problem with that is, again, we were always told in our training that labels are not helpful. Labels are unhelpful because they create ideas, and you form a judgment before you've even met that person. But then during handovers, people would say, bed 5's been kicking off. Well, instantly, you're on the defence because you're like, well, I'm going to be prepared.
Yeah, definitely.
Or they're not going to do that with me. So you go into bed 5, all ready for a fight, and then they see you all ready for a fight. And then
got a conflict there before you start. I had a situation, I was in hospital in May. I had blood poisoning. My dog nipped me. I ended up with blood poisoning. And my infection level was, I think it was 108. The consultant said it was a grey area. They weren't going to keep me in. They were going to send me home with a cannula in my arm. He put the cannula in my arm and then he went, "Oh, I'm sorry. Have I compromised you?" And I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "Have I compromised you? You're an addict." It hadn't even, it hadn't occurred to me. I had a cannula in my arm. I wasn't going to go home and put heroin in it. But he saw me as a 70-year-old, not ordinarily dressed, older woman, but he compromised me.
So how can we have better conversations? Do we need to have conversations? Because I'm making the assumption that it is in your notes, the addict, and the medication that you take and the history. So if, from the doctor's perspective, they've just come on for a ward round, they've just read it, or they're in A&E or whatever, he did that intervention, and then something twigged, and he thought, "Oh." So he may have had an experience himself where he possibly did compromise someone who wasn't as far in recovery as you.
As me.
So how
I had told him I wasn't using, by the way.
Right. Oh, okay. So you were quite right.
Yeah, before that. I had another situation. I broke 2 toes last year. I went to A&E and I had paresthesia up my leg. I didn't go when I broke them, but it was driving me crazy. And I saw the consultant and I said, "I've got paresthesia." He said, "What do you expect? You're an addict." And I said, "I didn't expect that." And I told him I've spoken at a couple of conferences.
I've got those thug life glasses coming down on you now.
So I suppose that reinforces when you get situations like that, and that's one last year, one this year, it just reinforces scummy attitude. Makes you just feel like a second-class citizen. You shouldn't feel like that, but
can't get rid of it.
It's been there for such a long time. What
was my response?
Oh, you didn't even bat an eyelid.
My memory is awful.
You didn't anything.
No.
You didn't.
You talk about shame, and you mentioned it yesterday, and I quickly had a look at Brené Brown. I don't watch some of her stuff, and I really liked her. And then I've not looked into this, so you need to fact check me. But I saw on Twitter that she was one of the people that were calling for Joe Rogan to be removed. So I kind of went off for a little bit, although I didn't actually see whether that was true or not. Yeah. So if you're watching this, Brené, I'm sorry if you didn't say that, and if you did, come on. But according to Brené Brown, shame is a focus on self and guilt is a focus on a behaviour. Shame is I am bad and guilt is I did something bad.
Wow.
And I think it's raining. I might need to close that door.
I feel both of those.
And with shame, so I'll give you my example in because it kind of, I'm just going to close that door 2 seconds. This will become a regular part of the podcast now. I'll get it on a t-shirt. Just 2 seconds. Oh no, it's everywhere. Gonna have to buy Lorna some more shoes because her shoes are so cute.
That's okay.
Okay, we're back. It's raining. Typical British weather. We'll sort this out. Yeah, so I guess the reason why I've gone on to shame after asking you what my reaction was so that there's two situations where I felt shame. Now, let me just go back to that. So shame is, according to Brené, I am bad. So I'll tell you the first one. And it was when I was doing my general training. So it was part of Chester University, Leighton Hospital in Crewe. And I believe the class was about 65. And we were asked to go into pairs, and we were given like little examples of people, you know, so one might be overweight woman in supermarket shouting at baby, prostitute on train, alcoholic begging, or whatever. There were all these different examples, and I remember I was paired up with this girl, and I'd kind of like done all these different kind of scenarios, and I was like, well, you know, you don't know why she's a prostitute, and this might have happened, or that might be happening, or she might be working towards something, or whatever. And I'd kind of like formulated all these little stories about all these people, and the lecturer had gone round the class. I can't remember how many, two before me, and then they'd got to me, and I remember the girl I worked with, because this answer was different to the rest of the class, she then said, oh well, I don't know, she's just done all these different like scenarios and things. And I remember the lecturer, like, I read one out and she started laughing at me, and she says, you would not do that, you would not behave like that. And I'm thinking, well, I would, because I've said it. And during lockdown, I'd walked to the supermarket, and I've always gone in the car before, but I knew there was a set of stairs at the back of it, and I thought, I'll just walk up the stairs, a little bit of a shortcut. Oh my gosh, those stairs were so steep. And on the top of the stairs was a guy, I think it was early in the morning, there was a guy, no, excuse me, it was in the afternoon, and he had a few cans around him. So I'm walking up with my bags, like, you know, huffing and puffing, because I didn't realise how steep these stairs were and how heavy these bags were. And I said to the guy, like, oh, how are you? Like, you know, gorgeous weather, whatever, just a bit of pastiming. And he said, you're the first person who's acknowledged me all day. And I felt sad for him. And then it brought me back to that situation. Yeah. And I thought, no, I was right. And I know I'm right, because I know that's what I do. And I'm not saying that I don't have judgments. Of course I could judge people. I would describe myself as the most least judgiest person ever.
Yeah,
like,
I would say, yeah, I'd reiterate that. People
will kind of almost confess to me at times. And if I think they're a dick, I'll say it. But I will always try and see things from their perspective. If they are harming themselves or other people, I will be very upfront with my response. But of course, when I'm walking down the street, I'm looking at people as much as everybody else is and thinking, bloody hell, look at her hair, or I can't believe she's got that skirt on, look how short. Do you know what I mean? But I wouldn't do anything. And I think if we say we're not judgmental, we are liars. And I think it's what we do with that judgment. So that was why I was asking you what my response was and bringing you back to that story.
I remember thinking, because obviously when I saw the circle and looked at what you were doing and what you were saying and reached out to you, I obviously thought you were someone worthy of reaching out to in my quest for some validation for what I was saying. And you were just really lovely. I think you did make some comment, but it was just really, really uplifting. It was just really nice, and I just thought, yeah, you didn't judge me in any way, and you don't do that. That's something you don't judge.
And I
people.
think for me, and kind of COVID cemented this, words and actions and lived experience. So that lady with the stereotype and the lived experience of you being a competent teacher, like, I think people, because of the pressure with social media, they're almost unable to rely on their lived experience, that all of these judgments and stereotypes are just helping them to make very quick decisions about who you are, what you do, what kind of a person you are. And I think that you said about the diabetic, they get it as well. They're in bed 5. It's not just the addicts.
Yeah.
But we don't individualize people. But you were saying, if someone's got diabetes and misses an appointment or misses treatment or something happens, there's not that.
They don't get a slap on the wrist.
Yeah. What am I trying to say? There's not that, like, punishment.
Yeah. It's like me now. My life at the moment is spending Thursday till Monday caring for my mum in Wellingborough, and then I come back to London on Monday. My husband's in a dementia psychiatric unit. He got brain damage in a leg operation in 2018. He's been there since January, and it's 8 buses. I don't drive, so I spend my time travelling to Seagrey, and then I go back to my mum's. So I've had to move my script to Wellingborough, and I've asked my key worker if I can have a month's script, because I have to pick it up. If I don't, even though I'm only on a tiny bit, I need it. I'm going to start withdrawing. It's not like anything like it's only a partial agonist as well, so it's not the same as withdrawing from heroin or methadone. But I don't really want to do that at the moment, at this time in my life. And I've asked if I can get a month's script, just so I haven't got like, for example, this week I'm going to see my back guy in Watford. I'm coming from Wellingborough. My brother's bringing me. I live near Watford. I've got a spinal injury. I live near Watford. My brother was going to drop me home. And now I've got to go back to my mum's because I've got to be there for Monday because I've got to get my script. There's no flexibility. I can only get a month appointment once for a holiday appointment, and there's no flexibility. I have to have it weekly, and if I don't pick it up by Wednesday, I don't get it at all. I'm punished. I've only got, if I miss Monday, I can miss Monday and Tuesday, but I've got to get it by Wednesday. If I don't get it by Wednesday, I don't get it at all. So it comes with strings. And I'm not really someone that likes being controlled, but I am controlled, and I have been controlled the whole time I've been in treatment. I'm really starting to, I've never really explored all this really since we've been speaking about it. It's something I kind of kicked to the back of my head. Also now, so years ago, if you went into treatment, you got a maintenance script. And so I've been in treatment for 30 years. But now that doesn't happen. So if you go into treatment now, say you're a parent and you've got an 18-year-old and you go into treatment, the government want to give you a methadone script or a Subutex script for a certain period, but they kind of really want you to get off it. You know, it's very different, and it is not person-centered care.
No, because I can understand the need for structure.
Yeah.
And I can understand when you've got someone who potentially has chaotic,
And it is
disorganised.
dysregulated.
I can
Living that
understand
lifestyle.
kind of trying to break that cycle and almost forcing some type of regular contact with a health professional. But then as that person improves, you know, having a look at that person as an individual and, you know, doing risk assessments and...
Yeah, and also as someone of my age, with the commitments that I've got to my 90-year-old mum, and there's my children and grandchildren and my husband, maybe the service should be looking at ways of making changes for different situations. It's very blinkered. It's like a one-trick pony. You know, we can't say, well, Lorna's got all these family issues, then yeah, we can give her, like, she takes her medication properly, she's not using, you know, to be fair, I don't have to go and give urine anymore because we don't go to the service, so I don't know whether other people are. Well, they know I'm not using anyway, but it's almost like we need to bend some rules. We need to take another look at addiction services for all aspects of different generations, and especially when I got my hands on the handbook, it's just box ticking. I didn't feel there was any empathy in that handbook. I didn't feel there was any connection to us as people, to us, and for the reasons that we, you know, you don't wake up one day and decide you're going to be a heroin addict or an alcoholic or all the other gambler, all the other things that people do, and I think it needs a lot of exploration.
A big shake up.
I really do.
Yeah, and I just go back to, again, that person-centered care, again, words and actions. We say we're doing this, and I think with the box ticking and the compliance and the focus on that, the person then becomes task orientated. And I'm not kind of bitching and moaning about, you know, all these people who are working in these services, because I think that's human nature to kind of, you know, just become focused on, I've got to do this, I've got to do this. And then if you're short staffed, like, oh my gosh, I've really got to, like, just focus. And you're just so blinkered that you don't have the opportunity to kind of, like, look up and then just look around.
I really think my key worker, Kimberly, who's probably going to be listening to this.
Hi, Kimberly.
Does her best with the tools that she has to hand. And
the limitations.
Yeah.
Of what's around you, and the amount of support and the amount of people who are also motivated to make the improvements that you want to make as well.
And there are also lots of courses that they run. There are lots of things that are accessible. There's a photography. I noticed today I got an email about a photography course which is starting today. So they do. I'm probably being a little bit unfair here in just focusing on, well, I'm talking about my kind of perception. So there are, they have like Saturday sessions. There's a church locally to me where you can go. And we did have a trip to Southend about 7 years ago, which I've always said, like a bunch of addicts, we all got on a coach and went to Southend. It was a really nice day. A bunch of people.
Sounds like a joke.
Bunch of people. Yeah, I know. And I've been asking kind of ever since, couldn't we do that again? Because it's good to meet up with people and talk. You know, so maybe I'm being a bit unfair in not speaking about all the options that they do offer, but the actual, it's all very well to get groups and do that, but the personal, it's not.
I think you're allowed to explain your experience, and it's not that you're showing a lack of appreciation for what you've received. However, there are areas that can be improved, and I think that it's by not having these conversations that people then one of the things for me was within care of the elderly, nobody wanted to complain, because if you complained, you might not look after my mum. Yeah. You might not give my mum her painkillers. I'm
hated where Graham is. In fact, the staff pretty much blank me.
And there is that,
because I make waves.
There is that fear of what are the repercussions.
Yeah, I do think about that.
I think you're being harsh on yourself, really, to say that you're this we're talking about identity.
Yeah.
We could have a different conversation where we talk about all the good things. So no, don't. It's okay. You're doing good. But I think it's good to have those conversations where, you know, we can talk about it, because if you only talk about the good stuff, the good stuff doesn't need improving right now. The bad stuff needs improving right now.
Definitely.
But nobody wants to have those difficult conversations. So no. So I asked, so I've got a few points here, and I will come back to the question I asked on Instagram yesterday. And I was having a look at identity and online and thinking, you know, is it helpful? Is it not helpful? What are people saying? And one of the things was, one of the articles I read was about how stereotypes and judgments can often be interpreted incorrectly. So the example was, you've got a promiscuous female and, you know, you think that she's, you know, a lower person. And actually, her motivation is wanting to get married. So she's just wanting to find a partner. She might not be going about it the right way. And I can kind of see that, how someone would be so desperate to, like, you know, get with someone. And there's that, you know, desire to fill a void in that person's life. So I can kind of see that. So I can kind of agree with that. Stereotypes give limited growth and assumptions. So I guess, if people have expectations of you, so if they are aware you're a drug addict, do they expect you to only perform to a 5,
right,
or only, you know, so not put as much effort in? And I think that can possibly be for both. Like, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like,
definitely.
You know, they think I'm a this or that or the other, so I'm not going to go to that photography course. I'm not going to get on that bus. And then the person who's having that conversation or judgment kind of thinks, well, look, they're not doing this and they're not doing that. So I think having that limited growth.
Yeah, definitely. It's very impactful.
Because of these labels that we... And, you know, I remember when people were saying, like, oh, labels are so unhelpful, and that was like the thing. And now it feels like everyone wants a label.
Yeah, that's
How
true.
many more labels can we have? Another example was children. So, well, that's the smart one, or that's the naughty one. Like, what's going to happen with those children? You know, you're going to... possibly the naughty one might decide, well, I'll prove you wrong.
I've been guilty of saying children of a certain name always tend to be, you know, children who've been named a certain name. Boys come to mind. Always are often naughty. Yeah. Couple of little boys come to mind. Mark and Harry.
Mark and Harry.
2 names.
I don't think I know any Marks or Harrys.
Really cheeky kids that I've taught. Often Marks and Harrys were
and I wonder if
cheekily naughty.
I wonder if the inner child in you comes out, the playfulness comes out with you when you connect with Marks and Harrys.
Yeah.
So then they respond to you in a child playful way.
Yeah.
And then that reinforces.
Yeah. I'm thinking of
your
certain
experience.
kids that I've taught, and Darren and various. So many kids I remember. So many kids I remember teaching. Yeah, I was very lucky to have a job like that, to have a career like that. I was very, very fortunate. Every day was different. When I was on supply for 5 years in the borough, Barnet, I worked in Barnet, and I was teaching up to year 6s. I'd start every day. I'm a great storyteller, and you might not think so from this interview. And I would start every day. They'd be on the mat, and
Put in the comments, do you think Lorna's a good storyteller?
we start the day.
If you've got this far, I think they think you are.
Well, it would be my journey to school, and I don't drive, so there would always be something that happened in my journey to school, and fond memories of that 5 years, telling all those stories every day to different children in different schools. I think the supply for 5 years is probably my best memories, actually. And having to be on the ball all the time, you know. I remember being a couple of pages ahead in maths with the year 6s. Maths was never my forte. Yeah, I remember being just kind of ahead of them. Yeah, but I feel sad that it ended the way it did. But it was not unexpected. And I actually look back on my life. 70 years, I've said a lot of stuff. I've done a lot of things. I've spoken out about a lot of injustices, and I feel quite content with where I am. You weren't going to ask me that, but I actually, reflecting now, which I didn't expect to do during this session with you, I feel, obviously, we made mistakes. My husband and I made mistakes, but we all make mistakes. You know.
I think content is a really good place to be. I talk about it with Rob a lot. Like, I feel very content. You know, we've got the dogs, we've got the house, like, we love each other, we're able to communicate with each other. I feel very content. I don't feel like, in my head, it's almost like a treadmill, like just people running through life, and it's like, you know, swiping right, or like, you know, grabbing the fancy coffees in the morning and stuff. Like, oh, I don't know. I just couldn't think of anything worse. Just like, I like being content.
Yeah, I've, as I say, I've got a immense sadness about the situation with my husband, and the way we're living now, the circumstances that have propelled us to where we are now. For me, very much living in the moment, the way we probably all should always live, never really knowing what's going to happen, is quite exciting but overwhelming, but challenging, and I just feel like we're in the revolution right now. 3 years into the revolution.
You're at the front with your flag.
Yeah.
Shall we go on to Instagram? Let's see what people are saying. Let's have a few minutes. Oh, it's going to...
What do people make? Well,
Let's have a look. I don't know whether there'll be any interference with the signal or anything.
I don't even understand how this is going out, Jenna. This is all...
So in what way would you treat a drug addict differently to a non-drug addict? And do you think drug addicts are treated differently in health and social care, was the question. So let me have a look at some of the responses. So I've got one here. My baby brother got hooked on prescription drugs and now buys them from wherever. Truly heartbreaking because he's cut himself off from friends and family. They're more vulnerable and weak, so they need support. And I think, you know, vulnerable and weak, you know, when you are in that situation where you do need help and you do need someone to support you, I don't think they're saying that they're weak because...
yeah, that made me think about my brother, actually. When you said he cut himself off, my brother phoned me some years ago. We're on good terms now. I'm 70, he's 69. And he's actually done really well for himself. And he said, we'd rather not speak to you anymore because of your choices, and cut me off. In fact, it's only since my uncle died in July, and I've had a big role in caring for my mum recently. Well, I've always cared for my mum, but I've literally had to live there half the week. That we've actually got close again, which is really quite nice. And actually, he's got much more of an insight into my actions and my choices, and he knows I'm doing this today. Yeah,
maybe he'll watch too.
Well, I don't know about that, but
we can try.
Yeah.
So I got yes. I worked for addiction even if they did not follow the rules. Oh, so yes, I worked for addiction even if they did not follow the rules. They were still treated. I don't know whether that's coming from a space of frustration of if they didn't follow, like you were saying, you had to be here on that time, or maybe they started to take again.
We wouldn't, unless you really, you know, misbehaved and didn't pick up your script and all sorts. You'd have to be really bad in their terms to kind of probably being kicked out of the service, or be really rude when you went in there. I mean, there's always a way to work out the problem that you've got at the time. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm just thinking back on something which, yeah.
Do you want me to carry on, or just...
No, you carry on, it's fine.
So we've got, yes, there's a mental barrier which needs care as much as physical. Get back to childhood and work through traumas experienced. Regardless of what they ingest, they are people too. There's always a reason why they're addicted to something. Everyone should be loved. This is my I'm reading messages face. Yes, they are seen as a nuisance and not really unwell. Doctors and nurses tend to treat them with contempt. Seen as weak, treated poorly.
Fair comments, yeah.
I'd say always be aware of lies. Addicts lie more.
I actually got accused of stealing my husband's tramadol prescription. Long story short, after the brain injury, he couldn't stay at home. It affected the frontal lobe, his aggression, violence, and he was never violent. He ended up in a care home, and he'd been on tramadol for quite a long time. He had a serious break in his leg, and he'd been on it for quite a long time. That prescription did not translate into the care home, and even though it was issued by the GP, not by the WDP, the organisation at the time, I was accused by social services and WDP of stealing that prescription because I'm an addict and addicts steal. And I didn't even know tramadol was an opiate at that time.
It's very easy as well. Like, yeah, it was Lorna.
Yeah.
Like with no kind of investigation.
And it followed me around. And in fact, when he did I got him out of the care home in March 2020 because obviously I was awake and I knew the government were going to shut everything down. And the organisation that were giving him methadone, which was in Enfield in London, put out a warning about me. He came home, and when his script was being sorted out, the key worker, it was on a Zoom, said to me, "I've got to put in one of 6 things about you, Lorna. I've never seen anything like this in my life." He said, "This has never ever come up before." And it wasn't safe. I wasn't a safe, these various things. I had a real battle with the service to get this all removed. Stealing my husband's tramadol. Stolen his heroin in the past, but not his tramadol.
Not all addicts are arseholes. Many are treated like they are. They're lost souls. Drug addicts are addicts because something's hurting them inside. They don't allow them to cut down, come off when they want. Farmer needs addicts.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a whole nother podcast.
What are we on now? 6. My opinion is no one grows up wanting to be an addict. And I think you said that before.
Yeah.
No one wakes up one day.
It's very good. The heroin's very effective for numbing pain. Very, very effective. It's a very, when you first start using, it's pretty incredible. Yeah. And some people say you get addicted after one hit. Took me about 6 weeks, I would say.
I couldn't, and I couldn't because I think I would enjoy it too much, if I'm honest.
That's why I never took cocaine. I never ever tried cocaine. I didn't want to like it.
I think I'd like it too much, and I think I would, I don't think I'd be able to not have that. So, I mean, not that I'm kind of thinking like, oh, I'm missing out not taking it, but certainly that's something that saved me from trying because, definitely during teenage years, I had access to it, but Well, I'd gone down the typical route of smoking hash and taking speed, drinking VP wine and Demerol, which was a cough medicine. I don't know what that is.
And then I got on a bus one day and took myself down to Piccadilly Circus. 14 and a half, nearly 15.
How easy is it to get access?
Oh, it was really easy back then. These days, heroin isn't heroin anymore. It's a cup full of crap. I think they reckon it's only about 8%. And also another problem now, which hasn't really hit this country as much as America, is fentanyl. And as a nurse, fentanyl's about 80 times stronger than heroin. And what the dealers tend to do in America, they put little stamps on their gear, and then every few wraps you got fentanyl in it, and then when someone dies, it's really good gear, you want it. And thankfully it's not really taken off in this country. I think it's a bit of a deal between the Chinese government and the American government. That's just my opinion.
Is that another podcast?
To flood America,
You'll
to
be a regular on
kill
it.
and undermine the youth. But that's a whole nother ball game.
Yes, very much stigma and any health issues they present as a case as if it's self-inflicted.
Oh, very much so.
Yes, 100% they are A&E department in a busy London hospital. They are treated better, someone says. A number of drug addicts have mental health issues, so I'd focus on treating that. Yes, they are made to feel as though they are deceitful. Wouldn't treat them differently. But people say it's their own fault. Yeah, so there's quite a few people saying, someone says, I suspect they are treated differently. We all have different needs and should be treated accordingly. Yes, I think there's a huge stigma attached to addiction. This is an established fact in substance misuse research. I watch patients get attacked. 2 seconds. Yes, it's looked at as if you've made your bed and I'll lie in it, when it's actually a disease. So yeah, there's lots of comments there.
Listening to Gabor Mate yesterday, he was having a discussion with Tim Ferriss on his podcast. He's kind of an entrepreneur, but has used a lot of drugs. And they were talking about the genetic aspect of it. And Mate doesn't actually believe it's genetic. I mean, that's a whole other podcast as well, talking about that. It was really interesting listening to. And he does a great one of those little cartoony things. Jordan Peterson does them as well.
Yes, you did see. And
I sent you it. It's a really good one on addiction, and it really.
We'll put the link in the description.
It really gets to the nitty gritty of. It's just, it really resonated with me. I thought it was really good.
I'll put the link on the.
Yeah, I think it's short, it's punchy, it's a cartoon, and it kind of says it how it is. So I'm interested in his. He does a lot of interesting stuff with mushrooms and all stuff like that. I did a lot of interesting stuff with mushrooms back in the past too, but not anymore.
Are labels helpful or unhelpful? What is a label you give yourself, and is it helpful or unhelpful? I'm happy with female as I'm born female. ADHD, yes, at 36, it's made my whole life made sense. So for that individual, being aware that he's got ADHD.
Yeah, having that label.
Yeah. And I think it's like what I was saying about the judgment and how people treat you afterwards, and how... so human is the only label we need. Unhelpful. Dyslexic is a label someone gives themselves. I think it's helpful as long as it's not overplayed. And I think in response to that, what my take is, what I get really frustrated about is when people jump on the bandwagon. So if you think about the gender dysmorphia at the moment, and there are some people who are really going to be struggling with that, who are going to receive a less degree of help now, a less amount of help, because it's become so mainstream.
Yeah, I agree.
And and I think with depression as well, I had one experience of depression once I qualified, and I think that was because of all the confusion, and by the time I qualified I just kind of fell into a pile really. And I think people don't necessarily know the difference, or don't communicate the difference between like sad, low in mood, depressed. So I think that a lot of people who are temporarily sad are saying depressed, and then that kind of takes it away. It dilutes the impact of it. So yes, that would be my take on about it being overplayed. So massively give people a label, and that's what they become. They're irrelevant. It's trauma.
Yeah, I feel like I'm almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, if you like, because I've been in treatment. It's probably 35 years. So I think that's helped to reinforce. I've always been someone that's always had to go to an organisation to get this drug that enables me to get out of bed in the morning and function, And obviously now I'm frightened to come off it. I'm frightened to be... I did try and come off just before I met you during the lockdown. I was so frustrated with the organisation. I was so frustrated with the system. I didn't want to be part of it anymore. And I stayed off it for 5 days. And some people who are listening to this will say, well, 2 milligrams subtext, it's nothing. It's nothing. It's still attached to the receptors in your brain. And there is a lot of fear, psychology, and especially as I'm someone who reads scientific papers like all day long about all sorts of things, not just about subjects. So it's, I think, having been in that situation for so long does help to make me define myself, see myself probably more as the addict that was that good teacher, that really good teacher. So it's only now, since we've been talking about this, I've really started to explore this. So it's as if I feel as if I need to shed a skin, the addict skin, if you like. So this is quite uplifting for me, quite refreshing to explore this, have this conversation.
Yeah, and I guess what I would like is if someone was listening to this and maybe, you know, someone said about their brother who kind of cut themselves off, and maybe they've cut somebody off.
Yeah.
And
that's very hurtful.
It is. I've cut people off in the past, but that's not through lack of trying. But then when it comes to a stage where it's just too painful for me,
then you have to. So and maybe that's how my brother felt.
Yeah,
maybe it was just too painful. He's never been acquainted with drugs. He didn't have the experience that I had when I was 4 years old. And you know, when you discover attachment theory and you do start to read about attachment theory, my mum hasn't really talked about leaving me at that home in Broadstairs, but she did recently, and she said, they took you in off the doorstep. I didn't go in. I didn't see where you were going. I didn't see where you were going to sleep. I didn't see where you were going to eat. You were 4. And all I can remember is you screaming, Mummy. And I feel sad for that little girl. I really do. And I do believe that's what led me into addiction and seeking that numbingness, you know. Yeah. And it's only really now I'm older that I'm feel as if I'm separating myself a bit from it. It's like,
and if you've held on to it for that long as well, I wonder what that means for you moving forwards.
Yeah, it's quite freeing. One of the first things with my therapist, I was talking about always having to have the doors open, the curtains, can never shut my curtains, and the light on at night. And she said, you need an escape route. I'd never thought of that I needed an escape route. My youngest daughter always comes in and even shuts the curtains when she visits. I say, don't shut the curtains. So I suppose that does hark back. But I think I'm probably thinking more about it at this stage in my life than I ever have. Probably down to you.
Are there any questions that you think I should have asked?
No, I don't think so, really. It's an endless subject, you know, and the depths within each one of us. I mean, it's so diverse. You could talk forever about it. I think I've probably said enough. Yeah, this is not sitting in a studio, which is in a van called Hope.
Studio.
It's pretty amazing with that nurse who asked questions, who I found divinely, I believe. Like everyone else I've connected with on Instagram, it's been that platform for me has had a huge impact in my life. Positive.
Yeah.
Positive
and I think,
impact.
You know, social media, it gets a lot of negative press, but for me it's about how you use social media.
Definitely.
Don't be used by social media. So yeah, that seems like a good place to end. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jenna.
And let's go and grab some food.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you, Lorna.
Cheers.